Okay, hi everybody. My name is Paul Davis and I'm the Artistic Director of Volcano Theatre. We are based in southwest Wales in the little city of Swansea, and we make work in a old shop called the Iceland building, which used to be a place apparently that only mums could come to and buy cheap frozen food, where they would construct improvised meals on the back of this cheap frozen food, obviously very good quality. And it must be because of this fact that we're here at the Iceland building that I have also taken on myself this idea of improvisation. So if you think about the relationship you're in today, or the relationship you might want to be in today or tomorrow, think of it as a choice. Would you like to spend 40 years of your life or 20 years of your life knowing what every meal would be? So in the morning, your partner, your lover says, we're having sausage and mash on Monday, and on Friday, of course, we're having fish with a béarnaise sauce, and on Wednesday, we're having spaghetti bolognese, and so on and so forth. You know, each meal is planned out, but wouldn't that be stultifyingly boring? Isn't it much better to get up and go, I don't know what I'm going to eat today, and I don't care. I'll find something and I'll concoct some marvellous dish. So it is with theatre, really, perhaps, that a 5-year plan of completing all of the works of Shakespeare, or all of the works of Chekhov, or all of a children's author. I mean, maybe that's laudable if you're an accountant to have these kind of 5-year plans, or maybe it's laudable if you're a statistician measuring relative income deprivation to see that it lessened over 5 years. But if you're a creative theatre maker, isn't it better to build in uncertainty into your programme of activity and accept new opportunities, nay, go chasing after new opportunities, or not even know whether it's an opportunity or a risk? So it is with what we are doing here today in Volcano, and what this Mooc is about. This Mooc is really about improvisation, creativity, and their part in what we broadly call in the UK the performing arts. By the performing arts, I mean performance that embraces all elements of other disciplines in a way, theatre, dance, the visual arts, design, a sort of ramshackled inventiveness that may be charming or kitsch or just technical. So that's what we mean by the performing arts. And what do we do at Volcano, and why do we think improvisation and creativity, the subject of this Mooc, what do we mean by them, and why do we think they're important? And that's what I'm going to talk about now. So hang on! Because I don't know what I'm saying, obviously, because I'm making it up. Because it would be strange if I was talking to you about improvisation and creativity and I had a script. That would be utterly daft, wouldn't it? So I see, even in shows like that we do, like Macbeth, we're going to do Macbeth later on this year. We've done it 2 years ago. We did a show called The Populars, which is about Brexit last year. I see all of the shows I do. I really like to have moments in them that are improvised. Sometimes I like them all to be improvised, the entire show. But even with scripts like Macbeth, there'll be a moment where it's entirely improvised and you don't know what's going to happen. Perhaps because you invite people up on stage and you ask them questions or whatever. Why is that important to us? Perhaps we could put that question to one side and just accept that it is for some. I think it's really to do with the liveness of theatre, really, and theatre not mimicking television or cinema. The only thing we've got going for us in this quite hard-pressed sector of entertainment or culture, if you like, cultural reproduction, is that we're in the space with people. So why say the same thing every night? Why do the same thing every night? Isn't that a recipe to kill the very practice that we love? So why not give the audience and your performers the space to make things up and recreate the liveness of it every single day? I think that's why I do it. But what are the key concepts and the key ideas behind improvisation? Okay, the first one for me is a difficult one in a way, because it's risk, and we all can mean different things when we use that word risk. But part of it is that when we start a process, I like to employ actors that enjoy the riskiness of the enterprise that you're engaged in. So again, to go back to Macbeth, there's no point doing a small-scale Macbeth with 4 or 5 people, because you're going to run into the same kind of problems of double casting and so forth. But let's do Macbeth with 2 people, because that kind of pushes the argument to its logically difficult point, where you go, well, they can't do the battle scene, they can't do all these other scenes. So you're immediately set with a problem, and having a problem in theatre is really important, I think, for the creative process. I think it's a shared risk that you invite actors to do things that are difficult. And we kind of, that's a principle that works in our youth theatre as well as in the professional work that we do. So when the young 5 to 8-year-olds and 8 to 12-year-olds come in these 2 youth groups, in a sense, we don't really teach them movement, steps, skills, and so forth. We invite them to develop their own sense of what creativity is in a structured sense. So we give them an object or a chair, or we give them some ideas, and then see what they do. And clearly, that's a risk for a culture where you're always taught things. And of course, as children, our educators are hell-bent on teaching them things. So asking them to follow what they say. Whereas we're saying, well, find out for yourself. So that, for me, is what we do with our professional actors as well. And also, that idea must play out for an audience as well. One has to invite an audience on a journey of risk. So going, look, some of this is going to be a bit surprising. So when we did Seagulls, it might have been quite surprising for the audience when the actors took their clothes off and shielded themselves with suitcases. But then when they started to go towards the audience and climb over them naked with a suitcase, that was even more risky. So it was risky and uncomfortable and funny for the audience, I hope, and also risky and uncomfortable and funny for the actors. So that's an odd thing, isn't it, about risk, that actually it can slide. In one sense, risk is danger. That's the word that we associate with it, really. Ooh, be careful, Martha, you're going to fall over. Be careful, little Joey. And so on, till we're blue in the face with warnings and the dangerous nature of life. But the other side of the coin, or the other end of the continuum, is risk it can be funny once we accept the surprise into our lives and into the space that we share. So that's one of the key concepts for improvisation and creativity, is risk. Because you have to accept that you don't know where you're going. That there isn't an outcome that the director has asked for. The same as, to go back right at the start to our peculiar metaphor of knowing what you're going to eat every night. If you do know what you're going to eat every night, and that's a common menu that you've agreed upon, there might be something quite pleasing about that. But after months and months of agreeing with your long-suffering or pain-in-the-arse partner what it is you're going to eat on a Thursday evening, surely at the end you must scream to yourself that you just don't want to know what you're going to eat, and you don't care whether she or he is going to share that information with you, because you actually want a surprise, maybe. Of course, some people might be listening to this and thinking, isn't this rather infantile to want to be surprised? And as you go, as we get older, perhaps the sense is that we want surprise less and less in our lives, and we want to travel along increasingly narrow thoroughfares or tracks. The last thing we want is to be jolted out of our comfortable petit bourgeois lifestyle and thinking, well, we've got to read, I don't know, the complete works of Chekhov or Shakespeare in the order in which they were written, and we don't want any kind of mashup by some theatre company in Paris, Portugal, Panama, Poland, or Swansea. So risk. The second core concept for improvisation and creativity is, I'm wondering whether I said everything about risk that I need to, but let's assume that I'm going to dance back to risk a little bit. The second core concept is structure. So in case that, I don't want to give the impression that our working methodology to create professional projects or our creative work with young people is not without attention to structure. Structure is key in improvisation. So perhaps the real pleasure with improvisation is hiding the structure or not being able to see it or not make it visible, or alternatively it's okay to make it visible. So for example, in a little youth show we did called We Really Want to Win But We Don't Want to Try Too Hard, the young actors improvised with a ball, throwing it back and forth and not looking at each other. When they could do that too easily and too comfortably, we had to make another rule, which meant that as they waited for the ball, they had to do another physical task before the ball came to them. And then if they didn't complete the task, they were out of the game. So the scene proceeds along a kind of with structured rules that they know, we don't know, the audience, and it's improvised entirely. Nobody knows where the ball's going to go, nobody knows how it's going to be thrown, and nobody knows when the ball's dropped what happens. So in other words, what we get then is a very satisfying, I hope, liveness to the event. It really is happening. People are really trying to do ludicrous things in between waiting to catch a ball. So another example of kind of a structured improvisation within the youth group that may or may not be included in this Mooc, I'm not sure, is we invite the actors in Micropolis to bounce along a piano. Don't do this, anybody, if you think the piano really is the fountainhead of Western civilization and the highest point of musical achievement that humankind has yet invented. But anyway, they trash a piano by bouncing along it and push each other off, and again the order is totally disordered. Nobody knows why they're doing it, what they're doing it for, and then eventually it comes to a point where they gather themselves up on the piano and they change to another scene. But the real liveness of the event and the improvisation is apparent, I think, to all. So that's my second sort of kind of big planet that moves around improvisation. There's risk and there's structure. I think one way of thinking about structure is to think about rules. What are the rules of this game? But of course, if an audience thinks perhaps too much about what the rule of the game is, the scene collapses into sort of petty cleverness. So in a way, you do disguise the rules of the game, I think. I think in another youth show, they improvised moving within the space and then quick and very slowly, and it got quicker and quicker until it became impossible to achieve any meaningful movement. And then we put music on top of that, which was, I think it was a Queen song. So that's another example of the way in which I think improvisation and structure interact and risk, because the performance goes so quickly, the performers don't know where they're going to run, so they have to trust each other. So I guess that's another word, a classic theatre, an educational word that is used a lot. And for risk to be successful, you need trust. You need the audience to trust you, but you also, in rehearsal, need the actors to trust you. Because remember that you've already confessed to the actors, you've no idea what you're doing. You're playing. You know, you're inviting them to play. You've come to the room together because you're going to do a piece together, and you know you've determined that it might be about sport, for example, because they don't like sport. And it's good to do things you don't like sometimes. So, but you've no idea what the outcomes or any of the points that you're going to hit on the way. So they need to trust you, and they need to trust the setup of improvisation has some rules. So obviously nobody gets hurt, but also perhaps that there are some creative outcomes. But remember that sometimes you have ideas and you try this kind of way of working, and nothing creative or nothing worthwhile comes out of it, but that's okay. Okay, so we're talking about improvisation and creativity, and improvisation is a key way into our Volcano's creative process. And I've talked about improvisation. I've talked about the key concepts, rather, risk and structure, or at least I've tried to talk about them. Hope I'm not talking too quickly. Hope I'm not talking rubbish. But, I might be doing both of those things, but, you've got to try, haven't you? The third thing I want to talk about is authenticity. Authenticity is a peculiar word because it oscillates around some big terminology in theatre practice, primarily naturalism and realism, and they in turn are related to the great historical achievements of Ibsen and Chekhov and others. And by now you're probably rushing for a large dictionary to smash the screen upon which you're watching this. But if we set aside the difficulties or the achievements of naturalism and realism and go, well, I don't know what they are, or we do, I suppose authenticity is in theatre we kind of are either engaged in a magical process where we conjure up an environment and a scene that fascinates and beguiles and enchants and bewitches an audience? Or are we playing something that is so heavy and loaded with meaning and pain and social realism because it's capturing a particular issue or life? Or are we trying to do two of those things? I mean, they're generally not done together because they're so massively different. I think authenticity can play a part in both of those kind of ways of doing drama. I think for us, in using improvisation as much as we do to make material, my sense is that I'm looking for an actor's movement to come from them, to just come out of them, sort of, rather than to be reproduced on the basis of some ballet training or some sort of other technical physical training like Lecoq or something. I think that authenticity nods more in the direction of literature than it does scholarly acting training, because what it's pointing to is another weird term, which is existentialism, or that you're really on stage in front of these people. You're not pretending to be. You might be pretending to be Cyrano de Bergerac or Macbeth or someone, a character, but first and foremost, you're you. Before you open your mouth and become Macbeth or Banquo or somebody else, the audience see you as you. They see your body in space. They hear your breath, maybe, and only thirdly do they get to those peculiar sounds which make a word which hopefully you'll understand and they will. So there's something shared. Before that, there's something much deeper, which is the body in space and the breath of the human being, which I would say is like the existential claim of the human being to be alive, to be accepted, to own the space they're in, to borrow it, perhaps is a better way of thinking about it. So from all of our improvisation techniques, physical, textual, are there really to remind the actor or allow the actor to sort of open that door of the authentic again. So, and it's to unlearn. I guess it's partly about unlearning, the social mores and how you behave, how you sit. If you ride a bike and have learnt to ride a bike, they say that you don't forget. I'm sure you probably do if you haven't ridden one for 40, 50 years, but you certainly would get nervous again. But I suppose the authentic movement or the authentic gesture or the authentic speech response is about going back to that instinctive language that you have when you learn to ride a bike, or the instinctive language that a child possesses, which is why there's a lot of improvisation in all our work with kids as well. So that's I see no difference between the way one needs to work with adults and children in that respect. The only issue there, clearly, when you deal with authenticity in improvisation, is that it's not always the case. People say, "Oh well, children are always going to be better at that." Some children already start censoring themselves and monitoring and reasoning and rationalising their movements at a startlingly young age, unfortunately. And our youth work is about trying to get them, to unlearn some of that stuff. But most certainly the authentic in improvisation for adults is about unlearning those and just trusting your instinctive judgment that nobody is going, "Oh, that's rubbish, Paul. You didn't do that very well." You yourself know when you kind of lost yourself in the movement or what you're saying, and therefore you're being as authentic as you can be. So the final and fourth sort of planetary star that oscillates around improvisation as a creative tool in performance is play, which we're sliding towards there in that conversation. This is a peculiar thing because lots of time in theatre you spend most of your time trying to raise the money to make the show, or cast the actors to make the show, or to design the poster to make the show, to have discussions with designers to design the set, to have discussions with lighting designers to design the set. So you're engaged in a hugely peripheral set of activities, vital no doubt to the process, but all of them require sets of skills that are not playful. They're definitely rational and definitely thoughtful in a meaningful way, to bring to fruition supposedly what's going on in the rehearsal room. You know, and I think probably the return of the playful and is what we're about with this kind of improvisation and creativity, is that if there's no pleasure and play in the room, then what pleasure can you expect the audience to get out of it? Of course, the left and perhaps even the bourgeois class has long held to the view that, you know, going to certain cultural events like the theatre and certain others like the opera and you know, perhaps some turgid symphonies, you go to them to improve yourself. So they're a bit like what one of my colleagues in the office enjoys. They're a bit like hardcore dentistry. So you really, you know, they're like root canal treatment, aren't they? So you go and you sit through yet another version of, I don't know, Titus Andronicus, which is a great play and has been done very well, but often you see it, or Midsummer's Night Dream, it's so confused and facile or bloody. In the case of the other, you're lost, but you enjoy it because it's good for you. You know, so you know, and I definitely think that Volcano have made, you know, for a number of years laboured under that illusion that, you know, if it's really difficult, it's probably good for all of the participants, the artistic director, the actors, and probably the audience. But I think now, for me, you know, the improvisation of play and pleasure are all connected, and that the playful child is improvising. They set up rules, they break the rules, they find new rules. They set up another set of rules, they play with them, and they sustain the game until they decide, let's break the rules because we can see another game here. And before you know it, you've got this kind of crazy patchwork narrative that is actually beyond time and space. And the participants are just in it. They don't know where it's going. They don't ask questions about that. They don't say, I want to stop now. They're just in it. And when it's exhausted themselves, and perhaps when they can think of no more rules, then it collapses into a sort of happy heap of joy. And I think that's something that, as adults, but also as theatre makers, that we need to revisit and learn from. So, for me, all of it really is about play. I don't think that's the overarching thing, but that's just one of the core principles, that you want your performers to be playful individuals. That's part of their skill. That's part of their major skill set. That they're lucky enough to be in a profession where play is valued, because play doesn't have a utility or a pound sign next to it, whereas, you know, pretty much every other profession does. Play is just about all we've got to offer the world, really. We might have some advice and some, you know, revelations about corruption in government, or, you know, more slaughter and military excess, but and that's valuable. But aside from that, then an audience comes to be reminded that they were playful individuals once, and perhaps somehow they've lost their way. And if they can reconnect to the playful parts of themselves, they wouldn't plan their evening meals with such thoroughness, and they wouldn't be, well, they might be able to approach life in a different way, you know.
you.